Welcome back to Closing Bell South Africa. Bankruptcies in the construction industry are not uncommon and are said to have risen to as much as 5 liquidations a month. MDA Consulting warns that companies need to be careful who they contract with, as liquidation is a reality. Joining us now to tell us more about this is Bennett, who is the director of MDA Consulting. Good to have you with us, Chris, and thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
If we take a look at this overall trend, I'm surprised that it's certainly come to the fore quite significantly so right now. But explain to us slightly more about the correlation between the rate of bankruptcies in the construction sector specifically and why it's increasing.
Well, for a while now, the rate of bankruptcies in the construction industry has been quite high. At MDA Consulting, we're a specialist commercial and legal advisor in the construction industry, and we deal a lot with these problems. And one of the critical components of the construction industry is cash flow. It survives and thrives on cash flow. And cash flow has been very tight for a while now, for quite a few years. And we've seen, even from the big fish falling, like the Seniority liquidation a few years back,
Yes.
to the more common liquidations, which are generally felt at the lower end of the scale. The emerging contractors particularly are at risk. They come out, they start out jobs, they might go a little bit too far, they get very excited and they're emerging. And the next thing, they don't get paid and they go down. Now, there's quite a lot of effort being placed in the construction industry to try and get around this problem. The CIDB, which is the Construction Industry Development Board, promulgates regulations which regulate the construction industry, most of the construction industry. That then promulgates various standard form contracts. Now, those standard form contracts are pretty good at regulating the contract, but it's not very good for protecting against getting into bed with the wrong partner. And these things can go wrong very, very quickly, even a month, 2 months, and it can really go horribly wrong. I've had occasion where we've had contractors, they will get into a contract, they'll get an advance payment because they're not going to be carrying the cash. There's very few, usually the large players who can sustain a project without too much cash flow. The younger guys or the smaller guys are very vulnerable to cash flow constraints. So they'll get what's called an advance payment, and they may have to provide a guarantee to the employer so that that money is safe.
Typically, for a small company, would that guarantee be someone's bond, or?
It could be a bond, it could be from an insurance company. There are plenty of service providers out there who provide these guarantees, and they're well known. Often what will happen is that they'll be in the form of what's called a demand bond, which is payment on demand. The employer walks in, goes to the insurance company, and he can do it at any time. You rather rely on his goodwill at times, because the contract is between the insurance company or the bond provider and the employer. It's got nothing to do with the contractor. He just provides it and sustains the cash. Now, what can happen is that, and has happened, is that the contractor will get his upfront payment, he'll provide his bond. Unbeknownst to him at the time, the employer is in liquidation, or is in a state of liquidation. He hasn't been placed in formal liquidation yet. He will then go out, he'll resource up, he will get the plant, he'll get the labor and the equipment and the skills, spend the money, and the next thing the liquidator is going to come and say, hey, that's a voidable transaction, give me the money back. He'll go to court and recover the money if he can. That'll then place that contract in an invidious position of having to pay legal fees to try and protect it, try and prove that it is actually a valid transaction. And that may cost him a lot. Or he can't sustain it, and he loses that, now he has to pay it back. If there's a guarantee in place, the liquidator may pull that guarantee. Now, instead of recovering the money from him, now the insurance company is going to recover, or the bond provider is going to recover the money from their contractor, and he may go down too. Now, obviously, the bigger the company, the bigger the fall, and the bigger the ripple effect, just like throwing a stone into a dam.
Sure.
Throw a big stone, big waves. So cash flow and major liquidations have a huge impact right across the supply chain, from the big subcontractors to the suppliers of plant and materials, steel, cement, all those sorts of things. Now, overseas, what happened in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a major liquidation in the UK, and that caused the bloodbath in the subcontracting environment. That company itself managed to make it through, but there was a huge problem lower down. Lots of guys went under. And what happened there, and what is feeding into our industry, was a series of regulations came out. And we are now in the position where we're about to see them come into effect in this country. We've spent the last couple of years at MDA studying these things overseas because we know they're coming. So we've been making ourselves familiar with these things because they really are going to change the world of contracting. Talk to us how these regulations
might change quite significantly.
Yeah.
So.
The big thing is there's two aspects to it. One is prompt payment. So in a nutshell, the regulations are going to provide a time period, I think it's 30 days, and at that stage they must be paid. If there's going to be a withholding or a set-off, that must come with a notice to say this is exactly what I'm going to do and this is why, etc. It's going to have to set out the reasons for non-payment. And coupled to that is going to be compulsory adjudication. Now, adjudication is a sort of rough and ready justice, if I can put it that way. It's not an arbitration, it's not litigation, it's almost a practical managerial decision-making process where you get an independent third party, he's going to be the adjudicator, and you refer your dispute on, generally it'll be on, or at these times it's mostly extension of time, additional cost, etc. But now with the payment, once your payment is late or there's been a deduction, then you can immediately proceed to the adjudicator, and then he must make a decision 28 days after you've notified the dispute. So that's really fast.
Sure.
How are we going to deal with it? I don't know. It's going to hit this construction industry like a ton of bricks.
Wow.
Particularly the prompt payment regulations. I think a lot of the employers are not going to be ready for it. They're going to have to get their payment structures lined up. You will not be able to, as a major contractor, often they have what's called a pay-when-paid clause. So once they get paid, they then pay their subcontractor. The subcontractor's going to wait for him to get paid. And that can take a long time. And that can also lead to a few going under.
Sure.
And sometimes those are abused.
Just before we wind up the conversation, though, in the meantime, while we wait for these regulations to come into effect, are there contractual elements that we can add for large companies to ensure that they mitigate against this risk?
Well, the best way is to get a counter guarantee for payment. You do obviously have your rights when you have a payment certificate, you can sue on that. But that's not cash, that's just a right. What's important is that you get the money. So the best way, although the standard form contracts don't specifically deal with it, except for the JVCC has a payment guarantee provision, is for contractors when they go in to say, look, that's fine, unless you have great confidence in the person and you know them well and you have a good relationship. And of course, at the state, you can't really do this. The state is never in liquidation. It may pay late, but it's never in liquidation.
We're happy about that, though.
Yeah, yes. Well, I mean, the bad payment by the state is another problem altogether. They pay eventually, but often too late. But getting payment guarantees as the contractor or the subcontractor is perhaps the best weapon you can get, and to insist on that. That's obviously subject to the commercial realities of making a deal and getting the job. So it's not always practically possible to get it. But those are the kind of contractual mechanisms you need to get, and particularly when someone's in liquidation, a third party needs to pay for that, like a bond provider or insurance company.
Chris, I wish we had more time because far-reaching elements of this, and clearly something which is quite important given how large our construction sector is in South Africa. But we certainly hope to get you back on the channel to provide us with more insights.
I'd love to be back anytime.
Fantastic. Thanks once more for your time.
And thank you for having me.
Chris Bennett, the Director of MDA Consulting. Well, we turn